Chulapol, you want to hit the button? Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for coming to our May Public Health Preparedness webinar. This is going to be the last webinar of this academic year, so we are really proud of all of our students that are going to be walking in commencement next weekend. You guys have done an amazing job, and we are going to miss having you in class, but as you know, you are always welcome to come back for our webinars, be part of our LinkedIn group, be part of our emergency management group, especially if you want to work on your emergency management certification, or you can always just drop us a line, say hello. We love staying in touch and knowing what you guys are doing and how you're able to use our degree. So for our last webinar of the year, I have Dr. Iskander, who is a captain in the U.S. Public Health Service, who is going to talk about science communication. So I'm going to turn it over and say thank you very much, Dr. Iskander, and we look forward to hearing from you tonight.
All right, thanks very much, Dr. Ostetek. So I'm meaning this talk to be somewhat of a companion piece to what you heard from Christy St. Clair from the Coast Guard a little while back, who offered the perspective of science and health communication. I'm looking at it as I consider you all, whether you all are graduating or not, to be really professional consumers now of scientific information. And I'm hoping to offer not necessarily some expert advice, but some issues and some approaches that I hope will be of use to you in your careers. So again, I have no conflicts to disclose. I will mention the names of some commercial products and services. Those are just for identification. So where I'm coming from, again, I'm a career public health service officer. I transferred from CDC in Atlanta to the Coast Guard 2 years ago to the day, actually. During my last decade at CDC, I worked a lot in the field of science communication. I was the scientific director for a monthly public health grand round series. I hosted a Beyond the Data video series and podcast. I edited a weekly compilation of scientific articles produced by CDC. And I've taught scientific writing at this point to hundreds of students at a variety of different settings. And one of my collaborators, Dr. M'ikanatha, is adjunct faculty at both Penn State and UPenn. And so I'm coming from the perspective of someone who's been a working scientist, but who's also collaborated with many others to translate their science to we always thought of our audience at Grand Rounds as being educated, but not necessarily expert in the topics that we were presenting to them. So this is an introduction to talking about, or actually, here are our topics for today. Again, we're going to talk about the scientific information environment. This is going to be a pretty broad survey at a pretty high level. I'm going to introduce this concept called scientific situational awareness, which I hope you'll find to be of use. We'll talk about ways to read and review journal articles, again, and do so systematically, and then offer you all some resources. And again, as graduate students, you may be aware of some of these, and again, hoping to introduce you maybe to some that'll be of more use to you as well. And so, again, this is part of the information paradox that we face today. We do, in fact, have the answers to even some incredibly complicated questions now, right? Literally at our fingertips with the rise of AI, right? We have potentially answers to much more complex questions at our fingertips, and yet we do not always use these resources in ways that forward science and help us improve the lot of humanity. So we are absolutely facing information overload. I'm reading a book now called Athena Unbound by Peter Baldwin. He presents data that states that about the amount of information we have now is doubling about every 9 years, right? And that number is likely to decrease as we go forward. So information overload, whether you look at scientific publications, whether you look at social media, text, however you measure it, it is absolutely a real phenomenon. So social media is certainly part of that information overload and information explosion, but this is some content I received from the communications director who I co-directed the Grand Round series with at CDC, and our view of social media may need to be a little more nuanced rather than just sort of blaming all of our information ills on it. We need to accept that it's kind of part of our landscape, and it's changing the way we communicate in other ways. It's not just that we're using social media now and other things. The way we use social media is potentially changing the way we're communicating through other media. It's also important to remember that really there are basically 3 reasons why social media content is shared. People think the content is going to be useful or interesting. They believe it'll have some impact. Number 2, I think, particularly with increasing polarization, we are seeing that sharing is a way of kind of defining self, not just the political self, but I think increasingly when people talk about echo chambers, often what contributes to that is, again, people sharing items that they agree with politically or that define them in those ways. So this is an example. Obviously, we see an image of Times Square, which is one form of sort of visual information overload. But this is actually a good example in and of itself of how we need to be good consumers of scientific information. So the headlines about this study are, humans now have the attention span of a goldfish. But of course, if you sort of peel off the layers, it turns out that this study was actually reporting about people's use and time spent with information on the web, which is not exactly the same thing as attention span, right? It is true that on the web, you only have a certain amount of time to attract and keep people's attention. But again, we don't want to be too over blaming of social media and saying, again, social media has now given us the attention span of a goldfish. Once again, it's a little bit more nuanced and complicated than that. Sorry, it's a very, it's a device I don't usually use, and the advanced key is very sensitive. Now, there's potentially an upside to the information explosion. It's not just that there's more facts, but the acceleration by which raw information becomes transformed into usable knowledge is in fact happening much more quickly than it used to. Things in science are going from fringe idea to what I call the everybody knows that stage. This is happening much faster, and these are just a few examples that I came up with. There are many more, and that obviously transformation of information into knowledge, right? That's going to have real world benefits. Once we knew that in fact it was bacteria that were the cause of most stomach ulcers and not quote unquote stress, right? We could then develop different types of diagnosis and treatments and do much less ulcer surgery. And so the production of knowledge, not just information and data, should have beneficial real world consequences. But again, that transformation is happening much faster than it used to. We also can see, just looking at the COVID-19 pandemic as one example, we saw over the period of just a few years a set of established scientific facts that did not change, and others that changed considerably. Right? We knew almost immediately, right, that there was asymptomatic infection and transmission of this virus. We unfortunately observed early and persistently that there were health disparities and outcomes. And even as new variants have emerged, vaccine effectiveness remained high against the most severe outcomes. People tended to focus on the facts that change as we accumulated new information. But, and in some ways, that was an example of how information can accelerate into usable knowledge. So the scientific landscape now is more complex than it used to be. We have peer-reviewed journals, preprints, so-called predatory journals. Many scientists now post their initial findings, often very important findings, on social media. We still do have traditional media that reports on science and medicine. We have the so-called gray literature from conferences and from meeting abstracts. We have reports, and again, as part of all of this, we have abstracts, we have visual abstracts, we have new ways of summarizing some of these older things, such as key points and summary boxes. And so it's not just that there's more new scientific information, it's really it's coming at us in many more different ways. So we do need some basic vocabulary to talk about this. There will not be a test on this, which is good because these are not necessarily textbook definitions. These are my kind of working definitions. So open access really refers to the concept that when research is peer-reviewed adequately and judged to be worthy of publication, everyone is able to access that through a fee paid by the publishing scientist. It's not supposed to be just you pay a fee and you get your paper published. That's predatory publishing. Public access is something that's existed actually for longer, and those are, for example, journals like the CDC's journals have always had all of their content fully available because, again, we pay for that right through our taxes. Full text, again, refers to being able to get all of the articles, not just the abstract, and again, without having to encounter a paywall or some other barrier. Preprints and preprint servers, again, this is a way of sharing information prior to peer review as a way to get the information into users' hands more quickly, and it's also a way to stimulate what we might call a more informal kind of peer review. Citation databases, most of us associate that with PubMed. There really are many others, and depending on what kind of work or research you're doing, it may be that other databases are actually going to be better suited to what you're looking for. And again, we talked a little bit about predatory publishers and conferences. You just really, especially as a new author, you really have to be aware of these. There are resources available through the CDC library that provide a little more detail about this. The main thing is to be aware that they can have names that sound very similar to those of real journals and real conferences. You really have to be very careful. In some cases, the U.S. government has actually, through the Department of Justice, taken legal action against some of these publishers. So I'm going to refer a couple of times to an article I wrote with Catherine Bianchi while I was with the Office of the Surgeon General a few years ago. And again, we introduced this idea of scientific situational awareness. And I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. The point is just to be aware that one of the features of the pandemic was that we developed much more awareness of new types of scientific information and knowledge repositories. Probably one of the most prominent example was the Hopkins data dashboard, which, my own opinion, but certainly in the earliest days of the pandemic, it was a much better source, certainly for tracking the global spread of the pandemic compared to some of the CDC data, which was just slow and incomplete, and in some cases collected inconsistently at inopportune times. But again, this is a much broader landscape of scientific information than we had even a few years ago. Sure, yeah. So again, I mentioned the fact that there are a number of different databases. Now, PubMed, one of the advantages of PubMed is that it is, again, it's part of the National Institutes of Health, National Library of Medicine. It's available to anyone with an internet connection. Some of these others are run by private corporations. So again, you likely have access to these through the university's library, but others, particularly in the global South, may not have access. And again, some of these are more focused on, for example, laws and regulations. That's LexisNexis. And again, knowing this, and the best way to really know this is to really become close colleagues or friends with a scientific reference librarian. This is one of their specialties, is knowing where to look for particular kinds of articles or information. And you will sometimes hear, well, just find me everything. And this is one of the this was true even prior to the pandemic. It's very true now. There is no database that has quote unquote everything, because again, there are gray literature, there is information out there that no one has turned into metadata. So there is no one. The point of the slide is that the database that includes everything is a unicorn. It does not exist. So I'm going to talk about PubMed Central, and again, I suspect many of you know about this resource already. The significance of PubMed Central is that it's a full text repository for US government-sponsored research. So it's not the full text of quote unquote everything, but it's a full text of an awful lot of things. And the basic concept here is you've paid for the research through your taxes. You shouldn't have to encounter a paywall that makes you pay again or pay a subscription fee to have to access it. And an awful lot, I was required every time I published at CDC to deposit a copy in PubMed Central. So very often, if you see NIH, CDC, FDA, a US government agency as part of the authorship of a paper, not universally, but often you can find it in PubMed Central. Okay, so now you have found this article. Maybe you've had to hunt for it a while. Maybe you've had to consult a reference librarian, look in a number of different databases. And again, you are now that professional consumer, and your professor, your department chair, someone is saying, well, what do you make of this? What do you make of this article? And one approach is just to sort of, read it start to finish and kind of see what general impression it makes on you. But because my job at CDC involved, reading and trying to synthesize a lot of articles, I actually somewhat as a defense mechanism, I developed this as one framework for systematically approaching a scientific article. It goes by the acronym CLEAR. So clarity, there are a number of clarity principles in writing a scientific article. And again, I come at it from that perspective because I teach scientific writing at least several times a year. The best summary of this was from Strunk and White, their famous book, The Elements of Style, and they said omit needless words. And that's the executive summary of that book. Everything else in the book really is detail, okay? And if you're wondering what serves the function of being means, that's is, okay? And of course, we would never say serves the function of being instead of saying is, but very often we do use many more words than we need to. We do want to be aware of using person-first language, plain language when you can. However, when you are writing for a scientific audience, it's impossible to eliminate all jargon. If you are writing about autism spectrum disorder, that is what the international consensus says that group of behavioral health conditions is called now. You might, in a media interview or in a broader forum, you might use the shorthand autism, but you will probably need to use the longer form when you're communicating to your more specialized audience. You generally want to use no more than 25 words per sentence and only no more than 2 clauses per sentence whenever possible. And you want to put statements in positive form. Say something is expected instead of saying it's not unexpected. And again, it's surprising how often, these seem like simple rules, but read almost any scientific article and you will find yourself throwing penalty flags on these principles. And again, this is just an interesting little facsinoma here, which is that E.B. White of Strunk and White is much more famous, I think, for most of us, certainly with me, for writing Charlotte's Web. William Strunk was his college English professor at Cornell, who famously was not a big fan of E.B. White's writing when he was his college English professor, but of course later it was actually White who then invited his former professor to be the collaborator for the elements of style. So after clarity, we have logic, okay? Logic basically boils down to, can you follow the argument of the paper? And again, this is a Monty Python reference, you know, it's the argument clinic. And the point is that an argument is not just saying, yes, it is, no, it isn't. An argument is a connected series of statements leading to a conclusion. And a well-written scientific paper should actually be making some overall argument, right? We might say hypothesis instead, but you should be able to follow what question is being studied, why it was studied, the way in which it was studied, and how the findings relate to that original question. That's the logic or the argument of the paper. So ethics, most of us know or have had to navigate institutional review boards or IRBs. If we're involved in a clinical trial, we know that that requires official registration. There is some sort of official ethics that are required, but it's also about was there some population of special interest, such as children or pregnant women or prisoners involved in the study? Was there anything that as you read it, you say, I'm surprised they were allowed to do that, or I can't believe they were allowed to do that? One of the examples I gave earlier of the discovery of the bacterial cause of ulcers, the scientist ultimately proved it by drinking the bacteria and, you know, basically giving himself an ulcer. He won a Nobel Prize, so I guess he got away with it, but we would not nowadays deem that to be ethically sound research. And again, this as a consumer and translator of scientific information, you have to be prepared to look at these issues and answer these type of questions. Agency is who are the authors speaking for. This has to do with things like disclosures and disclaimers. Most CDC publications do in fact have the disclaimer that the authors are not speaking on behalf of the agency. One of the exceptions is the weekly MMWR, or Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. That everything in there does actually in fact represent the policy of the agency. So again, the main thing here is just as an author, you should understand your institution's policies about disclaimers and when you're speaking for yourself and when you're speaking for your institution. So relevance really is who cares and so what? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your field, to your patients, to your, whether you have clients at a health department, whether your audience is the leaders at a health department or the leaders at a non-governmental organization, not just what the information was found, but what its significance is. Is it something that you should be changing your practice of, you know, how you screen for TB? Should you be doing that tomorrow? And again, usually you can find, you know, kind of clues, terms like new and useful, novel, because usually, particularly for studies that get reported, right, it's unlikely that a science journal is going to write about the 10th study that found the same thing, right? So when you see something reported, try to figure out what's new, what's useful, what's truly innovative. So this is a little bit of a plug here for those of you who may have thought about publishing your work, or maybe you're involved or collaborating in that kind of work right now. The work you're doing, you likely do have answers to important questions in public health and health security, and people are maybe seeking out that information. Producing scientific information, writing papers, it will make you a better consumer. You'll better understand by doing work, by publishing, that all studies have strengths and limitations, that no study is going to have all the answers. It's going to put you in a better position to be able to translate others' work into knowledge. I worked with a former CDC director who used to say the world doesn't just need evidence-based or evidence-informed practice. It needs practice-informed evidence, right? It needs people sharing their experience, sometimes in the form of data, sometimes in the form of commentaries and perspectives. And again, that's not the same as unsupported opinion. But the perspective of practitioners in the field is very important. And I appreciate that there are certainly barriers to publishing, but I'm hoping that this talk will give you a little inspiration and hopefully some resources to help overcome some of those barriers. So ultimately, this is what we're trying to do. As we advance in our educational careers, we're trying to really move up on the pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy. And at the point where you are producing newer original work, scientific publications are one example of that. Now you're really creating new knowledge, but again, you also now at the top of the pyramid, you kind of have a better perspective of the layers below it. Usually, right, let's say even a graduate school degree, you may be getting up to the analyze level, but ultimately, as we advance in our careers, we want to be continually moving up that ladder of understanding and synthesizing. So ultimately, other than just writing more, there are ways to become a better and more practiced writer. Serve as a peer reviewer, either internally or for journals whenever you have the opportunity. Always take the opportunity to give colleagues feedback. And this is kind of a little bit of a joke here, but always read the comments from reviewers, right? Most of us have heard with many things on the internet, never read the comments, but when you're getting them, particularly from informed reviewers, always read and take those comments into account. Participate in different types of writing projects. And learn also what you need to unlearn. Many of the things we learned about in creative or expository writing, they're actually not appropriate for scientific or technical writing. Most scientific articles, for example, come with a standard structure, so you don't actually need topic sentences. The section is labeled methods. People know what's going to be in the methods. Just tell them your methods. Again, blocking time on your schedule, either to write your own work or review others. And again, figure out what reference works best for you. Again, there are writing references that you can download for free or order for just a few dollars. But there's Grammarly, there's Grammar Girl. There are, find the resource that's most helpful to you. So again, once you've written something, you'll have a choice between posting something as a preprint or submitting it as a full peer-reviewed article. Basically, it's a trade-off between getting information out sooner. In some fields, it's important to be first. Sometimes in public health, we would rather have information out a little bit later. if it's more accurate. But again, it's a trade-off. Sometimes, honestly, I've used preprints as a mechanism when I'm just, frankly, sick and tired of delays that happen with standard peer review. And again, you can certainly do both. You can certainly post the preprint and then take whatever feedback you get from that and then submit it to a journal. Journals now have policies that allow that. Sure, I haven't lost. Apologies again for the very finicky advanced key on my computer. So this last concept here is scientific situational awareness. Again, think of it as the weather report for your field of science. So a useful weather report really is information for action. It helps you know how you should dress, what you should plan or not plan to do in that day. Some weather reports really are just filled with a lot of meteorologic jargon, and you tend to, at least I tend to, sort of lose focus, and at the end of it, I'm not sure what the weather is going to be that day. So ultimately, I think there are some core resources, right? Reference librarians, PubMed Central. You can set particular journals or citation databases to give you alerts for articles, particular types from particular authors using particular keywords. And again, don't forget state and local health department data and reports, which are usually updated pretty regularly. So again, I'm not going to go through these in detail. The articles that these are from is available via PubMed Central. But ultimately, what we were trying to do here was to say, again, how do you achieve that level of scientific awareness that's needed really to lead up, to inform your leadership, to help your colleagues understand what's going on. So I'm not going to, again, go over each of these in detail, but one of the themes here is trying to overcome the seizing on the headline of the moment, right? Because the headline may not accurately reflect the article may not accurately reflect the study, and the study itself may have limitations that you can only know by getting really to the source. And again, it's old advice, but it's really true. We need to continue to value primary sources. I always look to see if a media article has a link to ideally the full text article. Sometimes it'll have a link just to the abstract. I always then go and check PubMed Central. Sometimes you have to, again, literally go to the source code or to the raw data, because you cannot always be absolutely certain that even a peer-reviewed and published analysis or interpretation is correct. We also have to keep in mind when we're looking at the media, they may talk about research, but they may actually be referring to things which we would consider to be secondary sources, such as reviews and commentaries. It's also the case, remember though, that systematic reviews and meta-analysis, those are primary sources. Those, again, my subjective opinion, I think often are underreported by the media unless they have some very novel finding. So right, we know this is also another old, we're trying to direct people to credible websites, but then we saw a very large proliferation during the pandemic of what I called incredible website. And this is actually, there's I think, good news in this seeming bad news here, because really just 12 individuals were the source of about 2/3 of vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine misinformation. And so if this is relevant to your field, if you know those 12 people, you no longer have to individually try to argue against each of these. You can say, no, this is a known entity. This is someone who has repeatedly spread this information. This does not, we do not need to do a study to debunk this one claim. So again, I thought this was a really good example of someone who had done a study to give us some good scientific situational awareness. This is the quote somehow got stripped off here. This is the late Carl Sagan, and he said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and we certainly saw, in the field of COVID-19 vaccines, we saw some extraordinary claims, most of which were misinformation. So what really is extraordinary evidence? So again, we would be looking for higher levels of scientific evidence, such as clinical trials, not just case reports or case series or anecdotes or rumors. Well-conducted systematic reviews or meta-analyses, reproducible results. We want to see things meet cause and effect standards. Those include the Bradford Hill criteria. Obviously, we want research that's conducted in an ethical and transparent manner. And we want to see scientific consensus. So, often the answer to one claim or one sentence from one paper taken out of context is, well, let's look at all of the lines of evidence. And usually looking at all of the lines of evidence, while it may not convince the original claimant, it should be a language that your bosses, your colleagues, those you have influence over, will understand. So the concept of a scientific situational awareness diet, I borrowed this from the concept of the media diet. Most of us have certain news sources that we consult regularly, and one of the pieces of advice we might get is maybe to have a more varied media diet. This is not meant to be a universal recommendation. These are just some of the sources that I regularly consult or have delivered to my inbox. Again, this is a lot of information, but the good news here is almost all of this, like everything here, is open source. You don't need any sort of elevated clearance to access this. It's there. Again, synthesizing it, curating it, turning it into information. I think this is one of both our challenges for public health and health security in this century, but it's also really an opportunity to demonstrate the worth and value of our professions. So this will be posted again. I believe everything I've posted here is full text and open source and public access. We'll verify that. Dr. Ostek has my contact information if people are watching this later and have questions or comments. And I believe that is my last slide. And I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Susan Laird and Martha Knuth from CDC and Catherine Bianchi, who is now with BARDA. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciated you coming and speaking tonight. This is a lot of really great information. And our students do, we do encourage them to publish when they have opportunities. So this is some really great information that will be able to help them with that. I know it is getting close to 9 o'clock, so I don't want to keep you too long, but one quick question that I do have, if you could speak a little bit on getting into the public health service and any sort of advice that you might have for somebody who is looking as a potential career path.
Sure. So obviously, once you graduate with a health-related postgraduate degree, that is the sort of minimum qualification to be eligible for a commission in the public health service. A couple of things to be aware of. Unlike other most military services, your commission does not automatically come with a job. So what you'll need to do is really simultaneously be pursuing the commissioning process. And for those of you who may have prior military service, you'll recognize some of those elements. You need to get a medical exam and fill out some paperwork, provide transcripts. But that process can take 12 months or longer. You can use some of that in between time to start actually looking for the agencies you may want to work for. Again, there's a great diversity of agencies. I mentioned agencies such as FDA, CDC, and NIH. If your degree is really, or interest is really in more direct patient care and serving marginalized and underserved communities, there are also agencies such as the Indian Health Service and the Bureau of Prisons that typically have a lot of opportunities for newly commissioned officers. But I think my strongest recommendation is use your connections, use the school's connections to find an officer in your category. And again, there's 11 categories from physicians, nurses, pharmacists, therapists, health scientists, almost any postgraduate health-related degree can be accommodated. But locate someone in that category who's a commissioned officer in the public health service. Ideally, do that actually before you even start the application process, because they can often either personally or reach out to resources to help you navigate that. I will say this right now. If you want a mission that just very few other people in the world have, it is the U.S. Public Health Service. There are about 6,000 of us. There is no other uniformed public health service on earth. And my colleagues are just extraordinary. And Congress isn't giving us the money, but we probably need a public health service many more times 6,000. So I would absolutely encourage people who are mission driven, whether or not they have prior uniformed or military service. But absolutely, and again, Dr. Ostek, happy to work with you offline to as we discussed earlier, to raise the program's profile for the public health service.
Thank you. And I think one thing that's really interesting that we've learned from our public health service speakers is that even though you are an officer in the public health service, it's not necessarily a straight career path, and you've got you've got many different opportunities to pursue different things. You can be working with the Coast Guard. We actually had somebody, and her last name escapes me, but during the beginning of COVID, we had an industrial hygienist named Carrie Oyster. She worked with us with the Coast Guard, and she went from Coast Guard headquarters in the middle of Washington, D.C. to an Indian reservation. So probably as, far apart as you can. But it seems like if somebody's interested in the public health service, you don't have to worry about getting like backed into a corner with a career that you're going to be bored in for 20 years, because there are so many opportunities to pursue so many great different things.
I'd absolutely agree with that.
It also, for people that are interested in the public health service, but maybe not as a full-time option, public health service has instituted a reserve program, if I understand correctly, in the past few years.
That is correct. I have worked with a few reservists. I think the best resource for that would probably be on the web, or again, see if you can connect probably indirectly with someone in a category who may know someone who's a reservist. But there should be a web presence for the Reserve Corps by now.
Great. Well, thank you again so much. I appreciate you taking time on a Wednesday night to talk to us, and I will post a copy of this on our in the library where we have all the webinars, and I will also send the link out in our LinkedIn group. So if you have any, if you want to go to any of these resources, you will have them available to you. If you have any questions and you want more information on any of this, please reach out to me and I can get in touch with Dr. Iskander. And again, thank you so much for taking your time on a Wednesday night. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Have a great night.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.